I think 10, but they told me that there are 12.5 million or 13 million in Sao Paulo. It's growing substantially. Beautiful city, beautiful people.
Just talk.
Just say a couple words so we get a level.
Okay.
Is that a right? Well, you must have heard that in Spanish. I called you director of DEA in Spanish. Is that I know that you say administrator.
That's fine. Director is fine.
Okay, fine.
I think it translates director anyway.
Yes. But maybe for administrative circumstances here in the States, one changed that completely meaning.
Yes, administrator here means something very different. Even the Attorney General, when he'll talk about DEA, he'll talk about the director of DEA. So even he forgets.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Start on you, so pull out and go to 2 seconds. We'll open on the, okay?
Okay.
Low tape. We'll,
Estamos con el señor John Lone. Él es director de la Agencia Antinarcóticos del Gobierno de Estados Unidos. Mr. Lone, in Mexico, as you know, for fighting drugs, 400 people have been killed. Around 50% of the Secretary of Justice budget is devoted to fight drugs. 20,000 soldiers fight drugs. And you know, we're passing through an economical crisis. But we use those resources for fighting drugs instead of using them for education or housing, you know, all this. This is what we see. Now, we want to know what is 25,000 soldiers also combat drugs in Mexico. We want to know what is your opinion about Mexican efforts against drug trafficking and drug production.
The Mexican effort over the past 2 years has been substantial and has realized substantial results. For example, in 1985, the forces in Mexico seized twice as much cocaine as they had seized in 1984. In 1986, they seized 5 times more cocaine than they had seized in 1984. Unfortunately, the forces in Mexico have suffered substantial losses of personnel. Mexican federal judicial police have been killed in increasing numbers. Our cooperative efforts with Mexico last year resulted in the seizure of perhaps 2,200 kilos of cocaine. And in a recent investigation in which information was furnished to the Attorney General's Office of Mexico, 700 kilos of cocaine were seized, as well as 54 automatic weapons coming from the United States into Mexico. So the efforts of the government of Mexico, the increasing efforts of the government of Mexico have shown increasing results.
Some U.S. senators say that Mexico does not cooperate enough to fight drugs. The OTA, that's an office in the Congress, published a report called Border War Against Drugs 2 weeks ago. It states that American police agencies have not succeeded in their efforts to control the drug problems. Mr. Lone, what is this? We get the critics when here in the United States, U.S. doesn't really get to solve their own problem.
I think once we begin talking about the problem, if we talk about it being one nation's problem or another nation's problem, if, for example, we say that the problem rests with the source country, Mexico being a source country for heroin and for marijuana, or if we find ourselves saying the problem rests with the United States, which is a consumer country, instead of saying we have a mutual problem, our young people mutually are suffering because of the problem. There are corruption problems. There are the deaths associated with law enforcement in Mexico, in the United States, and indeed throughout the world. The toughest barrier we have to fight is the barrier of trying to find out why things are not going as well as they're going. What we should be doing is working together for a mutual solution to an international problem.
What is your opinion and what is going on in the Congress about the disqualification of the report in the cooperation of Mexico against drugs?
We have testified about the cooperation of Mexico and the cooperation of other countries who came under scrutiny, and we have a very close relationship with the Attorney General Garcia Ramirez. We have a very good working relationship with Mr. Ortega Padilla, and when we do have problems, we are able to address the problems on a law enforcement to law enforcement basis, and we see that there is cooperation between our countries.
Is the government made that report based in the data issued by the agencies outside the United States? Does the Congress have a different basis of data that they can disqualify with this data the report of the Presidential Commission?
The data upon which the Congress has worked is a compilation. It is a summary of the data that is collected from any of a number of agencies. Certainly they receive input from the Drug Enforcement Administration. They receive input from the United States Customs Service. They receive input from Immigration and Naturalization Service. And in addition to that, they also travel to these countries and acquire some personal data upon which they base their decisions. But we, in our testimony, have talked about the areas where we have had good cooperation. We have also talked about those areas where, with other countries, cooperation was not as good as we thought it should have been, or in some cases was not as good as those other countries thought it could have been. But it is a mutual effort. We must work together, and in working together, that means that we the information gathering must not be one-sided. Information sharing must not be one-sided. That it must be a mutual effort.
But the data was the same for the presidential report as for the Congress.
Yes, the data that was available to the Congress and to anyone else who had an interest in that data.
Okay, Mr. Lund, why are the U.S. government reactions to the Camarena and Cortez cases so different than those regarding to the recent killings of some DEA agents in Atlanta, San Antonio, and Miami? There was much publicity to the Camarena and Cortez affairs. Why was so uneven when it happened to the killings here in the U.S.?
I think, and you and I had discussed this previously, I think because the circumstances are very different. We in law enforcement, whether it be in federal law enforcement, in which we are in the Drug Enforcement Administration, on the state level, in state law enforcement, or on the local level, law enforcement depends upon the working relationships that we enjoy with one another. And when we travel to another country, our support system is the law enforcement people with whom we work in that country. In the case of Special Agent Kiki Camarena, the system failed in that law enforcement personnel in Mexico who should have been supporting their brother-in-arms, Kiki Camarena, instead became corrupted by the traffickers. Law enforcement personnel were responsible for his kidnapping, and we believe that they were responsible for his death. That's why our reaction was so strong and will continue to be strong, because we feel that there was a violation of law enforcement trust. Certainly in the case of the killing of Special Agent Stastny in Atlanta, or Special Agent Torres in Texas, those are priorities of ours. In those cases, agents were killed by traffickers. We will continue to work those investigations until all individuals are brought to justice. But that's something that law enforcement must accept, that when we do dangerous work, violence will occur, and unfortunately, we will sustain losses. What I will never accept as a law enforcement officer is corruption within law enforcement. And this is what killed Special Agent Camarena, and this is what was responsible for the torture of Special Agent Cortez. And that's something that law enforcement throughout the world will not accept.
Mr. Victor Cortez said, maybe you know this, say that the night that he went back to his home, he was very afraid that something else could happen to him, and he asked some friend to take care of him.
Right.
You know the story?
Yes, I
Can
do.
you tell it for me?
Yes, when Special Agent Cortez was released by the Guadalajara Police Department, we insisted that personnel stay with him because generally after a major incident, there is a what we call post-incident shock, where the victim, in this case Special Agent Cortez, has to talk out what happened and has to have some feedback, has to have friends of his around him who can support him. We had asked Special Agent Cortez to have friends of his around him for that purpose. Special Agent Cortez asked two of his close friends to stay with him. These two close friends were members of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police.
So there is a trust in Federal Mexican Police.
Absolutely. And the working relationship that is enjoyed in Mexico is the relationship between DEA personnel and the individuals with whom they work, who have built this mutual trust. And again, that was the real tragedy of the Camarena death, and that was that the trust that Kiki Camarena had built up was violated. But in the case of Victor Cortez, his friends, the persons in whom he had the most confidence, were in fact members of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police.
And we would like to know, Mr. Long, which is your opinion about the coverage the media gives to the drug problem? Because when the brother of Camarena's brother was captured here in the States because he was involved with drugs, it had very little coverage in U.S. media, the same media that gave a lot of information about Camarena in Mexico.
I certainly read in the papers about the arrest of Special Agent Camarena's brother, and Kiki's brother had been involved in violations of the law for over 20 years. So I think that his arrest, his most recent arrest, was one of any of a number of arrests over the past 20 years. It's unfortunate that within our families, all of us are not always law-abiding. The tragedy of the Camarenas is that within that family, they had a war hero who was killed in Vietnam. They had a hero in Kiki Camarena who was killed in Mexico. And unfortunately, they had someone who has been a violator of the law for a great many years. Perhaps that does not capture the media's interest because he was just a common thief. But that's something over the years we learned to live with.
But do you think it's balanced, the coverage that media gives, not only to this affair Camarena, but to the efforts that producing countries or trafficking points of drug efforts the governments of those countries make for what we get information here in U.S. media?
I think we have to appreciate the fact that what we do in law enforcement, we protect the law. What the media writes about is what is important to the media, and that is circulation.
As a citizen, you have an opinion as a citizen.
Certainly, as a citizen, I think that there are issues which the general public should be more knowledgeable about, And I think the responsibility lies with the media to make the general public more aware of situations. But the responses that we receive are that unless it is information that will be of benefit to a greater majority of the circulation of their readers, it's not newsworthy. And the fact that an individual was arrested for driving without a license, whose brother is a deceased DEA agent, the fact that that doesn't make the newspaper is something that really is of little importance to me. And I can see where the general reader would not find that to be something important to be in a newspaper.
Maybe having the context could be a great of interest.
We'll change tapes.
We'll only need 2 more questions,
sure.
I think.